Good evening, everyone. And in addition to Payal, my warmest welcome to all of you. And of course, there are the other ladies of Algebra, Nina, Shuli, Ritu, and Anjali, who join me in welcoming all of you here today. Many of you knew, so just very quickly, I'm going to remind ourselves what Algebra means. And it's kind of significant to mention that today because, the first conversation is going to be both about the math and the poetry of something divine. And Algebra too has a kind of beautiful meaning, which is that it means the science of restoration and balance. And a lot of the encounters that we try to curate here for you is really about pursuing that impulse of bringing restoration and balance back into our public conversation and the way we think about the world. First up today is a conversation which really is about man's most sublime arsenal, which is music. It is proof that Richard Dawkins is wrong, and our existence here has meaning, it has significance. It is really man's gesture, I would say, against the void. And I know I'm speaking in superlatives, but I'm in good company because Ustad Ali Akbar Khan and Allah Rakha Khan Sahib also spoke of music as a language of divinity. And in that already sublime land, Zakir Hussain's fingers are absolutely a special deployment. To listen to him, to listen to his sound, is to be in the presence of a gift of such virtuosity that you feel ebullient, you feel euphoric, you feel exuberant, you're just happy to be alive. So today is really special because we're going to have a conversation which allows us to explore not just the art, but the heart of Zakir Hussain, to understand how that music has come about, how that rhythmic, how that virtuosity, as I said, has come about. The math behind it, the science behind it, the poetry, the passion, the faith, the conversation, and even the psychology of it, because so much of it is about observing others and their craft and their gifts. Unraveling all of that is someone who has spent a lifetime actually having conversations with film. Nasreen Munni Kabir has written a book on Shah Rukh Khan, which is the inside and outside life of Shah Rukh Khan as a superstar and as an individual. She's written 15 books on cinema and has had literally book-long conversations with people like Javed Akhtar, Lata Mangeshkar, A.R. Rahman. And now she has unraveled for us this journey of how Zakir Hussain went from being a 6-year-old boy playing on a stage, from that boy of music to the man of music. What were the inflection points? What is that huge and long and sublime journey? And we are very, very, very honored to be hosting that conversation here today. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome two exponents, as I said, of the most sublime arsenal of man, music, and its most profound exponent, Zakir Hussain. And with him, Nasreen Munni Kabir. I mentioned the book, I didn't mention the name. It's Zakir Hussain, A Life in Music. It's outside, you must buy it. I'm so excited about it. It is so rich that I've pretty much signposted every page because it's going to be the beginning of a kind of musical journey that I at least want to make with my children, because it is just peopled with anecdote and insight and music that you want to devour. So I would strongly urge you to fall upon the book at the end of this session and buy it in droves. So thank you very much for being here, both of you.
Thanks for having us here.
Yeah.
It's beautiful, and thanks for coming, every one of you. This is really a pleasure and an honor to be able to sit amongst you and whatever little we know and talk about it. And Nasreen ji is the brains. I am just the rhythm behind the brains. So we'll see where we go.
So Zakir, as I said, Nasreen has pulled so much of anecdotes and kind of texture out of your life and your journey that we could be here 5 hours. But I'm going to dive in really into the inflection point of your birth, and your naming. would you share with the audiences how unusual it is that you've been called Zakir Hussain and that you don't have your family name, which was Qureshi, and that, you know, almost kind of divine experience at the moment of your birth itself?
Well, I was the first son born after the three daughters, and way back in the last millennium. And yeah, I almost feel like, you know, अब ये मियाँ अभी तो उम्र हो गई हमारी. So anyway, when I was born, my father was very ill. He was gravely ill. I mean, people were coming to pay their last respects and stuff and so on. He had just finished a few months before giving music to a movie called Bewafa, which starred Ashok Kumar, Nargis, and Raj Kapoor. And so they were showing up at the house, I was told, just to pay their last respects and so on. And so I was born, and my mother was not sure that I was lucky or at all, and so was a little bit hesitant with me. When I was brought home from the nursing home where I was born, I was handed to my father, and his job was, according to tradition, to whisper a prayer in my ear. And so he was not well, he could barely hold me, he was barely conscious, and so he put his lips to my ear and sang tabla rhythms. So instead of saying Om, whatever, Bismillah or something, or Om something, he did rhythms. And my mother was a little bit upset. You know, why are you doing that? According to tradition, you should recite the Quran or something in his ear. And he said, but this is my prayer. I am the worshipper of Saraswati, Ganesha. This is the knowledge that I have. This is what I pray through. And so this is what he is going to do. So I'm going to start him out today with this prayer. So that's what I got. Now, a few days into me having been born, the name was not yet given. I was just baby Qureshi at the time. And so sort of a saintly man came to the house and called out my mother and said to her that I know that you have a son, and I know that your husband is sick, but don't in any way shun your son away. Thank you. And you know, now we know why she's here, right?
I just thought you'd miss the sum of your rhythm, you know.
Yeah, the shun of my rhythm.
The shun of your rhythm.
So anyway, don't shun him. Take care of him. Watch him carefully. For the next 4 years, watch him carefully because it's going to be dangerous for him. But he is going to be the one who's going to bring your husband back. And so look after him and call him Zakir Hussain and make him the fakir of Imam Husain. Now this is interesting because we are supposedly Sunnis, and Imam Husain is a Shiite community. And so he said, make him the fakir of Imam Husain and watch him. And so call him Zakir Hussain. So that's how I got my name. And it turned out that for the next 4 years after that, I would get regularly sick. I would get fever, typhoid, boils on my body. I would by accident drink kerosene, you know, just to keep the continuity going. And so on and on. But what was interesting is every time I would get sick, my father would get better. So in that sense, we were connected. And 4 years down the road, he became healthy enough to be able to play, work, do concerts. and I had to then go into recoupment. But from then on, my mother made sure that I would, on the Muharram days, go and beg in 7 houses as the fakir of Imam Husain, wearing a kada and green clothes and stuff and so on. And then after, when I started traveling abroad, I couldn't do it, so she herself did it. And so she kept up that tradition, and so that's Zakir Hussain's name arrival.
Yeah. I really wanted that. I really wanted that story shared as the starting point because Zakir has such a profound relationship with his father, of course, as teacher and student, but as friends, as a spiritual connection. Zakir talks later in the book, about how so much of the rhythmic compositions that come into his mind, he feels are transmissions, and I hope we'll have time to explore some more of that. But also this strand of just how syncretic, the ethos from which Zakir has come, like he said, coming from a Sunni family to be named in the Shia tradition, all of that is fascinating. And Zakir, because it means zikr, which is to have the rhythmic naming of God and Allah, so all of that I think was really like a light tower announcing what the trajectory of your life was going to be, Zakir.
Yeah, it was all laid out for me a little bit early.
So Nasreen, I wanted to come to you. So you've, like I said, really laid bare Zakir for us, I mean, in the way you've questioned him and brought out stuff from him. You both are like raising your eyebrows at the laid bare. But I wanted to ask you that in this entire thing, what were the really big inflection points for you? Would you pick, say, 1 or 2 moments of real illumination where you got to understand something about Zakir that you absolutely did not know about him through your research?
First of all, I'd like to thank everyone for coming here this evening, and I'd like to thank 2 people in particular, because this book would not have happened without them, and one is Tony Ji, who is Zakir Saab's wife. She made it happen, and I've said this again and again at every book launch, and I have to thank her again, and Shantanu of HarperCollins, because the minute I called him up from Bombay and I said, look, there's this possibility of this book, Shantanu is so supportive. He immediately said, I will, yes, go ahead. And he's been, just there for the book. So Tony Ji and Shantanu are the ones who are really the forces behind this book.
And now to my question.
Yes, now to your question. I think that when you do a conversation book, you make a list of questions, maybe 10, and you go for your interview or your discussion. And
sorry, can everyone at the back hear Nasreen? Yes, okay.
And then you've got a little louder. You've got 10 questions on your paper. You should get home with at least 5 unasked. Why? It's because the first 5 should trigger different kinds of conversations. Otherwise, you are not listening to the person. You're not understanding what is the development of his thinking. So that makes a big difference in terms of dealing with someone like Zakir, who is extremely articulate. So you don't really need many questions. You ask him specifics, and then you allow him to develop his thinking. I think when I hear him in concert and on stage, and when he speaks, I think there's a great similarity. The similarity is that he gives you lots of information, a lot of talent, of course, but a lot of information, musical or words, and then he also makes sure to balance it. So he's quite aware that there should be humor, there should be a balance of information, and that, I think, is a very musical way of answering. It isn't pure words, it is an understanding of presentation, and an understanding of actually connecting with the person who is asking. Often he said that when he gives a concert, he is very aware of the audience as well. And so he's quite aware of where you're leading, where you're steering him. So it was a pleasure, and I just hope it was nice for you too. It wasn't too boring.
Nasreen, that's such a blatant ask for a compliment that I'm not even going to allow it on my show time. Zakir, I'm delighted that she's described you as a composition, because the thing I found very fascinating when you were describing that process of music is how you went from that old tradition of just playing a structured performance into understanding music as a conversation. Can you talk to us about who helped you arrive at that language of conversation? Was there an inflection point, a particular encounter that made you aware of that shift?
I think the information was being transmitted throughout my journey as a musician, as a student of this art form. From the very young age, I mean, Shujat Bhai is here, one of the great sitar players of our time, and he would tell you that when you are born in a family where music lives day and night, 24/7, it lives and breathes, and it's in the air, it's all around you, that it's going inside you. You're hearing it, you're breathing it, you're feeling it, and so it's almost like you're learning, without learning, a language to speak in other than the language of words. So that's one thing that you learn to do. And also, in that process, you are not just learning this expressive element, but also you are learning the protocols. You're learning what to and what not to. You are seeing various shades of gray that are being lighted for you, but still allowing you to be able to interpret it the way you feel that you want to do. For example, when my teaching process was going on, and this happened very early in my life, I told you my father whispered rhythm in my ear, so that's what he would do regularly, as much as he could, day in and day out. And he'd hold me and he'd sing rhythms in my ear. And this would go on, I think it went on for about 2.5, 3 years. So by the time I was 3 or so, I had all this information inside of my head, which I had no clue about. And then, once I was able to bang onto things, had hands big enough to be able to tap out a rhythm or something, he let me go. And that was a bit of a shocker, because I mean, just when I thought that I was going to now be taking the next step, I was left alone. And so that was for me a bit of a downer, but his students were around who would help me along with whatever the language was. So I was being guided, but not by him. But his whole thing that came to me later, and I understood, was that he needed for me to find my way of interpreting this information, my way of analyzing it and finding, a way to tell the story in my own way, in my own expressive language, whatever that may be. So he started me off very early into doing that. So this is something that you grow up in the music family. When, say, Ustad Vilayat Khan Sahib is practicing at home, he's not going to sit and going to tell Shujat Bhai, okay, now sa, ma, ga, dha, and a little stress going to dha, just slide over the pancham ever so much. No, I mean, he will play for him, he will sing for him, but he will wait for him to interpret it. And that's what is the process that we go up.
Nasreen, I'm going to come to you about this whole process of having a conversation with a perfectionist and an absolute maestro and the sheer terror of that, but I'm going to come to that. Just before
Perfectionist? Perfectionist? Perfectionist?
Perfectionist? No? Yeah, actually. But before that, before we come to how you dismantle the idea of perfectionism and music as terror, I wanted to ask you, Zakir, that you just spoke about this imbibing music in as a language, and you've spoken of that quite a lot in the book, just this fortune you had of being able to sit in the presence of greats and literally have a kind of process of osmosis. And both your father and you had really dramatic entries onto the stage. He at that Lahore Baitak and you into Ali Akbar Khan's concert when just suddenly at 6 you were asked to play. But what about people who are not born into music and into a music family? Can they, they are not privy to this kind of imbibing of music all the time.
Yeah.
Do you think you were particularly fortunate? And just a second question to that would you please sing some of the rhythms that your father sang for you when you were a child? Would you share some of that with us? And I just want to tell you, his father used to wake him up at 3 o'clock at night, and from 3 to 6, this is what he was imbibing. So what sounds very beautiful, I'm not sure what an experience that was, to be woken up at 3 and be having that till 6 o'clock in the morning as a little boy.
Yeah, well, that happened when I was 7 years old, so it was fun. It was great. But that's another thing. So the first question was osmosis.
And if someone's not born into music?
See, the thing is, we all have a particular DNA that's inside of us. I mean, some of us are born to be mathematicians. Some of us are born to be a scientist or a musician or a cricketer or whatever. As much as possible, early in your life of being a student, you should be guided as to what is that you can do. And so, like for instance, when in my father's school in Mumbai, when we are there and students are there, they are within the first year or so very clearly told, okay, get information if you want, become a listener of sort, a little, sunkar. But this may not necessarily be for you, but let's see what it is that you're good at and see if we can guide you in that area. So that's important. So you can't always tell somebody, okay, you be a musician, and then open up the process of that discovery for that person without knowing if that person even has
that coded in them.
Yes, exactly. So that's something that is presumed to be sitting in the family DNA. So therefore, the ustad or guru's son and son's son and so on and all are expected to be able to do that. But that also is not true. Not every son or daughter of an ustad is somebody who has become a musician. There's a great tabla player, was Ustad Thirakwa Khan Sahab, whose son actually became a novelist, wrote Urdu books. And none of his sons really became any kind of tabla players of note, but his grandson.
The gene jumped
Right into it, like Rashid Mustafa, and his son is now playing. So it will skip a generation or two, and that is the same thing that, like for my father, I have to tell you, belonged to a family of farmers and soldiers. There were no musicians in our family. So in that sense, having achieved what he achieved in his one lifetime is something of real greatness. But there was this spirit inside of him that came from somewhere and planted itself inside of him. I sometimes feel that, when the stork delivered my father, the baby, to the family, I think he took a wrong turn somewhere and brought him to the family of farmers. And then God said, oh boy, that was a blooper, a big mistake. Now how do we correct it? So what happened? My father, as a young child, started to have dreams. And in his dreams, he would see faces of musicians playing music. How did that happen? I have no idea. He said he had no idea how it happened. My analysis of it is that, there were traveling minstrels who were going through the villages in those days and playing music, and he as a child probably heard it. And it kind of remained inside of him because that was what his spirit needed to do. And so it took that information and printed it as the information to deal with. And so that's what happened. So by the time he was 11, he was totally flustered. And he keeps seeing this face, and he ran away from home at the age of 11. He ran away from home and went to the nearest big city, which was Lahore. And there he found his uncle, who had a shop, lollipops, candies, whatnot and everything, and helped him along, helped in that shop. And kind of found his way around music and local musicians and so on. And his uncle was a little bit interested in music, so he took him to one of those gatherings. And there, my father ended up playing a little bit, and people were impressed with him because he had taught himself how to play. And so one of those people sitting there said to my uncle, his uncle, take him to this person, and this person should teach him. So they brought him to this person, and lo and behold, it was the face that my father was seeing in his dreams. How did that happen? We don't know. But I'm sure in his subconscious he saw it in a newspaper or something or whatever. But so there it was. And the Guru, Mia Qadir Bakhsh, when he saw this child and said, play. So my father put his hand on the tabla and he stopped him. And he said, who is your teacher? He said, you. And he said, but I have never seen you. And my father said, but I have seen you. So in Hindi or Urdu it was, मैंने तो तुम्हें नहीं देखा, जी, but मैंने आपको देखा है. So it means different in a different language. So that's how it happened to him. And his hand position was exactly like Mia Qadir Bakhsh's teachers. Now how that happens, we don't know. So the DNA has something to say in it, the spirit has something to say in it. God, after making mistakes, has ways of correcting and finding the path, and like, okay, let's create this, another entrance onto the highway and get this man on board. So that happens. So this is what it is. It can be Pandit Ravi Shankar, who didn't ever play sitar. I mean, he was Uday Shankar's younger brother. Music was not necessarily in their family, and yet he became one of the great sitar players of our time. So it's hard. Pandit Hari Prasad Chaurasia, his father was a wrestler. He himself wrestled as a young man. No music connection, but yet becomes one of the greatest musicians of flute ever. Yeah. And same with Pandit Shiv Kumar Sharma. His father sang a bit, but he invents a whole new system of playing and brings forth an instrument never used in Indian classical music, santur. So it's hard to say that there is one book of how to, but you have to realize that if you early on in this day and age, now that music and art as a teaching process is so easily available, identify the DNA of a student, say, yes, this one can, this one can't, and very clearly point that out, which teachers in this day and age, I'm sad to say, do not. They would rather just keep teaching you because they don't have the heart to tell you, you don't have it. So move on. So that happens.
Thank you, Zakir. That really, I know now what Nasreen feels. I have 30 questions in my pocket. I'm going to ask only 2 today, But it really did answer this whole question of whether being born into music or outside of music, the music finds you, in whatever way. I'm going to come back to asking you to sing some of those rhythms, Zakir. But first, I wanted to bring Nasreen back into the conversation. As you've done so many books around film, Nasreen. One of the most interesting aspects of the book is about Zakir's engagement with film music and with composing and doing scores for film music. And he has this beautiful metaphor about thinking of film music, the background music, compositions as being water in a vase, What did you understand about that? What do you think was special about the way Zakir's engagement with film and film music was?
Well, Zakir Sahib himself says that his father was a composer in films. So the film world was not alien. I don't know, many people here have this feeling that there was a big divide between classical musicians and film musicians. But this was not really true because you had, people were working, and the same with poets. I mean, everybody who's worked in films knows that Zahir was a poet, but he also wrote film songs. And the same was true of musicians. I remember Naushad Saab telling me a long story about how he persuaded Bari Ghulam Ali Khan Saab to sing in Mughal-e-Azam. And he said that when he went to Bari Ghulam Ali Khan Saab said, no, I will ask Naushad a price that he won't afford. So then Naushad Saab said, Khan Sahab, aap bataiye kya chahte hain? So he said 25,000 rupees. So Naushad Sahab said, bas theek hai. And so did Asif Saab said, bas theek hai. So then Bade Ghulam Ali Khan Saab said, okay, I'm not going to sing. You play the film for me, let it run on the screen, and I will watch the images and then sing. And that is how the singing in Mughal Azam, that wonderful, I'm sure people here know, the feathers scene, that was how it was recorded. So there wasn't this kind of terrible wall between them. But clearly, the film musicians, they were having one life, and that was cinema, whereas classical musicians had two lives. They were classical musicians, they were also occasionally working for film to earn money. It wasn't necessarily because there was that choice. So there was this balance of understanding different audiences as well. Cinema audiences are different. In many ways, there's a whole different engagement with cinema. And with the concert, it's something else. Cinema has this kind of possibility of making things immortal, whereas a concert is for that evening. Of course, if you buy a record, you take it away, but the film lives in your mind in a very different way as music. Music, you can't remember, well, some musicians may be able to remember a whole musical phrase, but in cinema, you can remember 5 scenes or 2 scenes or characters. So the relationship is quite different. But I do feel that when Zakir Saab talks about how he understood film music, I think what I was very pleased to hear was an amazing respect he had for film musicians. Amazing respect because later in life, when he did his own kind of fusion or world music, you could see that he said himself that he'd heard it before, because film music is this amazing mix. There's a violin in 1 minute and it becomes a trumpet at the next, and it's all very harmonious. And the era in which Zakir Saab was playing music was the best era. In the 60s, he worked with people like Madan Mohan and Roshan Saab, and so they were top guys. So it was normal that he would have a very, very, very good environment to work in.
So in fact, Zakir, we've got that thing parked. It's really something we want to relish, and I know the audience will love it. So please do sing out some of the rhythms for us. But before that, just leading on from Nasreen, you did say about how this engagement with film music prepared you later for Shakti and for Planet Drum and for the Global Drum Project. And you've played with the most eclectic musicians across the world, So one, if you would talk about that preparation. And secondly, there's this absolutely fascinating encounter you had with Carlos Santana's drummer, which you said really opened up your drum for you. You didn't know that the tabla could be what it is until you met him. So would you share both these things with the audience?
Well, first of all, I think you must understand that when you talk about film music, there's 2 different elements to it, at least in India. One is the songs. So you have a music composer like LP or Vishal Shekhar or whoever it is, they compose a song which a singer is going to sing, and it's going to be picturized on whoever the actor is that's going to dance and do whatever it is that's going to happen. So that's one element of the film. But the meat music of the film is what we call the background score. That's the music you hear behind the scene. When somebody is running, you hear a certain kind of music. When it's dark and somebody is creeping up the stairs, you hear a certain kind of music. That's background music. That's the music that in some ways brings to life sonically the scene and puts the emotional content at a much more higher level, so that you can actually experience the scene not just visually but also in terms of its emotional beauty. Compare a scene of, say, a dread in a silent film. When you see it in a silent film, it's different. It does not affect you as strongly as when you would see a Jaws, and suddenly this cello is doing these 2 notes, Purup, purup. You feel an impending sense of doom, and it comes at you, and inside of you, you're getting very afraid and fearful. But all you've heard is this thing, and there's this sea, and there's somebody in a boat. And it's daytime, the sun is out, but yet you're afraid. That's background music. So when I'm talking about, say, a flower vase, and there are flowers in it, the music is like water in the flower vase, which will give succor to the flowers to bloom. Those flowers are the scenes that you see. So the songs have a different role to play in a film music, while the background score is actually something which becomes the director's voice in being able to express what the scene is trying to say. So those two things are there. Now, if I was to say to you, "Dagit tagit 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 ta, darin nagit tagit nagatari gidana, trigita trigita nagatita gatarika tagadigina trigita trigita." You know, oh, this is rhythm. It's scatting a rhythm composition. But if I was to say that I've just invited you to this gathering, you don't know that. Well, how is that possible in this rhythmic element? So I will say, please come and sit down. Tagit 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 ta. Wait. Get the weight off your feet. Have something to drink. Have something to eat. Satisfy your hunger. Then listen to the concert. And then go home. So now, when we are being piped in, all this rhythm and music and listening to it, it's a language that we learn to speak in. I mean, that's why it becomes second nature. You learn to listen in a way where you understand the grammar of it. You understand where the inflections are. You understand where the full stops are. You understand where the question marks are. You know, kahan the aap? You understand those things. So it's not just mere rhythm being pounded on the drum. And it's the same with melodic structures as well. So when you're talking about language, this is what we are learning. We are learning to speak in a language where we can form words, form phrases, sentences, paragraphs, and speak this language. So if I was to say, din din, can you imagine? I mean, you know, it's how you say it, how you speak it. And then that becomes your way of telling the story. So this is something that we were learning. This is something that we grew up with. It's not something that's taught. You know, I have to tell you something about listening. That story about a young actor in Hollywood. So his movie is done and it's about to be released. So before releasing, the studio has a showing in the studio owner's home for, you know, the beautiful people. And so they all see the movie. And then after the movie is seen, all the actors and all come to this young actor and congratulate him. Say, oh, very good, well done, good job, Oscar material, no, you know, no brainer at all, it's all done. But there's one actor who's sitting in a corner seat and hasn't said a word to this young man. So this young man is getting a little anxious and then finally works up enough courage to go to this senior actor and looks to him and said, "Sir, Mr. Chaplin, what did you think of the film? My role, what did you think?" So Mr. Chaplin looks at him. Now here's this guy from a silent movie, Mr. Chaplin. And he looks at this actor and says, "Young man, don't wait for your turn to speak. Learn to listen." It's one of the most important teachings that you can get. Now, learn to listen is very important in music. When I'm playing with Shujat Bhai or his father, Ustad Vilayat Khan Sahab, I have to listen. When I was playing, another story. I did a 4-concert tour with Pandit Ravi Shankar. I was 16 years old. He was not. So we started in Mumbai, went to Hyderabad, Bangalore, Cochin, so on. So after the first concert is over, a day or so later, we met on the flight to Hyderabad. Now I'm sitting next to him, and his main routine was he would buy a lot of magazines and papers and stuff, and he would sit and read it in the flight. So I'm sitting next to him, and really kind of anxious that he would say something about the concert that we played. Nothing. So we arrive in Hyderabad, and we play the concert there. Next day, we get on the plane to go to Bangalore. Again, I'm waiting, nothing. Not a single word. So I mustered up enough courage, and I said to Ravi Shankarji, Uncle, I think the concerts went well, right? I mean, rather than, you know, I'm looking for recognition, right? I'm looking pat on the back, boy, you did good, great. So concert went well, right? So he said, yeah, it was okay. And then back to his magazine. Then after a while, he realized that I was getting a little bit, you know, antsy. And so he puts a magazine down and said, Zakir, you played the concerts with me, 2 concerts. I said, yes, sir. Do you remember what I did? He said to me, do you remember any instance in the concert where we looked at each other and there was some connection there? I was at a loss for word because I could not remember anything about what he had played. All I remembered was what I had done. See, I was sitting like this, looking at the audience. He's over there, and so, okay, so you're there, fine. But I got to get to these people. And so I'm playing, and I'm getting all the, you know, applause and all that stuff. And so I'm thinking, because I'm doing that, I've done my job. I wasn't listening to him. I wasn't paying attention to him. We hadn't connected. So then he tells me, but Zakir, you understand that we are playing together. So even if you are my accompanist, we are still having a conversation on the stage. We are speaking the language of music. So don't you think it's important that we should connect? We should interact. Our eyes should meet. Our nods are in the right place. My smile tells you what I want. My look tells you where we are going next. Shouldn't you be paying attention to that? And it made total sense, total sense. So from then on, I decided that I should sit at an angle, looking at the musician that I play with. And from that age onwards, 16, now I'm, what, 18 years old or something? That's what I do. It's a conversation. Music is a conversation. When we are sitting in a dressing room, waiting for the concert to begin, we have cups of teas and stuff. We are not talking about which rag, which tal, what's going to happen. We're more talking about, वो movie कैसी थी, cell phone नया लिया है, बच्चे ठीक ठाक हैं, उधर खाना खाने जाना चाहिए, करीम्स में चलते हैं, program के बाद, etc., etc. That's going on. And then once the organizer comes and says, sir, announcement हो गया, so we go up and we start playing music. But what has happened in the dressing room is we've established
Camaraderie.
a camaraderie. We've established what mood we are in, what kind of feeling we have at that moment. And so when we go on the stage, that kind of interaction and feeling now transposes itself into the language of music.
So, Zakir, I'm going to just butt in over here a little bit because I'm just teeming with all the stories that I want you to share with the audience. Before that, Nasreen, let me just pull you back. And I asked you this question. I know Zakir, and Zakir, really, you do come across as a young man because I don't know why I'm not calling you Zakir Saab, you know, so forgive me, you know.
I'm okay with that. I mean, after all, I'm only 18, right?
Tony, you've done something right with him, you know. You've kept him young. So, Nasreen, you know, I know that he doesn't think of music as a language of perfection, and he's spoken again very profoundly. I'm not going to press that button of his because I want him to tell other stories about how he didn't want music to be a language of terror for his students, you know, the way many other teachers make it. But I'm sure interviewing him and being in conversation with him would have been at least marginally an anxietal process for you, you know. So can you share some time when you screwed up? Did he scare you? Did you make a mistake? Did he snap at you? What did you do wrong? When did you get the sum wrong?
I think the only time he was irritated is when I was talking about purity in music. And he didn't seem that that was a good approach to it. And he was right, because there is no such thing as purity in music or purity in any form, because we're all living and we're all changing every day. But I was not anxious for that. I was more anxious about the fact that he's very busy. He lives in a different city. I live in London. He lives in America. He's always on the move. Time was a big anxiety. Would we get it all done? And there, Tony G really made a big difference, because it moved and it happened. I will say that what makes you anxious is more that from the very start, he knew that I was not a music expert, and that he did not mind about that. The question really for me is that whether it is music or a painter or a filmmaker, their processes are the same, because they have different obsessions and different passions. And what that book, you've mentioned various things that were discussed in the books, and hopefully people will read it. You will see that a lot of things, the line of questioning and the line of answering is about discovering the person behind that passion. And people say that, they sense that they're in the room listening to Zakir Saab speak when they read. And you have to find a way of getting him, without being intrusive, because nobody likes that, but to be able to reveal himself. Now, he's someone who he could do 10 interviews a day. So how are you going to surprise him? The only conversation that will really work is surprise. And I'm not sure whether you can surprise anyone who gives so many interviews. The only thing with interviews, which is journalistic interviews, is more about the here and now, whereas the book aims it to be a much wider biographical conversation. So that is the essential difference. It's not about the here and now. But the fact of the matter is, what does this kind of conversation reveal? As Zakir Saab has already just said, it's about listening. And I think that is...
I think, what was very special for me in the book is that it's not only a biography, it's a biography of music, and it's a biography of him, which is why we called it the art and the heart of Zakir Saab, because it really came through, both his psychology, the emotional landscape that he's walked, but through all of that, you really come to a great understanding of music, which one has really not understood,
But you also have to be very careful to keep a timeline going. Otherwise, the reader gets utterly confused. You can't hop. Yeah. You still have to have a thread of once upon a time, then there was the middle, and coming to the end. You have to have that structure.
I'm glad you mentioned timeline, because I'm thinking my timeline as well, Not for that, because I just have so much to get out of you still. So, Zakir, we left 2-3 things hanging. One was this encounter with Carlos Santana's drummer, and what that did to you. There's a beautiful description in the book about how you discovered your tabla through that encounter. So will you talk about that a little bit?
I think the journey became relevant after this one incident, probably, and that incident being that I played a concert with my father. We played together, and after the concert was over, we came off, and one of his admirers, friends, came up to him and said, "Khan Saab, kya baat hai, bahut acha hua program, and it was fabulous and stuff." And he said, "Your son, he's so good, he plays just like you." And my father said, "I hope he doesn't." And he said, it's very simple, because me, it's already done, he said. I'm already done. People already know this. Why should he just be a copy? He has to be better than me. He has to do something more extraordinary than me, something different than me. If he's going to be a copy, he's going to be thrown into a dustbin where all the Xerox copies go. He must not be that. He might be somebody different. So up till then, I was a clone. I quoted my father through my tabla verbatim. I sounded like him, I played like him, the phrasings was like him, all the T-highs were like him, all the compositions, everything that he did, I did, religiously so. But at that point, you know, I thought about it, and I thought about it, and I realized that he wanted me to find my own identity, just as he did when I was 3 years old, and he let me go. And he wanted me to figure out what I wanted to do. He wanted me to go to him and say, I get it. He wanted me to go to him and say, I want it. You know, it's very clear, you know, a teacher never teaches. The student learns. This is very important. A student must inspire the teacher to teach, or else there's no point in it. They say, I've heard this from Shivji and so many other artists, that knowledge is like a fast-flowing river. And that river is passing through, just like Lord Shiva, Ganga passes through him. The river of knowledge passes through a teacher, a guru, a friend, a mentor. It doesn't matter. And it's up to the student to be able to get a cup out of that river, or a bucket, or a truckload out of that river. It's up to the student. And so, whenever I played in the room and I was practicing, I was always looking to see if I'm going to get any attention at all from the man. And that attention only came when I actually took the information that was given to me and twisted it to reveal a different angle in it. When I did that, there would be a and then suddenly he would walk and he'd be standing at the doorway and he'll say, okay, da din now do da din. Suddenly, you know, I had inspired a chain of events in his mind, and then which allowed him to be able to then just add to what I was doing and say, okay, you've done this and it's good. He wouldn't say it's good, but that's what the reaction to it was. Do this. So inspiration would come. So the teacher would never teach. The student has to get that information out and inspire the teacher to teach you. So this is something that we all learn. Now I've gone somewhere else and I forgot what we were
But that's all right. In a way, very quickly, it actually leads into that question I asked you about your encounter with Armando Peraza.
So this is what I wanted to say. So it became relevant because then I realized I have carte blanche to be able to take my tabla and turn it into something else, mutate it, turn it into a hybrid something or other. And so I started looking elsewhere, and I was lucky. I arrived in America. I was 18 years old, and you know, having studied tabla for about 12 years, grounded, but yet young enough to be able to bend to various, you know, the way the river flowed. And so I started to see and realize that I considered, having arrived in America, that I was a custodian of a 2,000-year-old tradition, and that we had a very scientific tradition, and we knew everything about rhythm, and that we were going to teach the rest of the world what to do. And here I was confronted with rhythm traditions which I was at a loss to understand what they were. And learning had to begin again. And so that process, I was watching these drummers like, you know, Tony Williams, or Billy Cobham, or Armando Peraza, the great conguero who played with Carlos Santana. They were not only playing rhythms on their instrument, they were actually talking to their instrument. They were actually coaxing tonal world out of it, melodic structures out of those drums. And suddenly I just realized that tabla has that ability. It has the ability to not only just beat out rhythm, but also be harmonically sympathetic to a vocalist that the tabla is being accompanying, or a sitarist, or a sarodist, or a santurist. And it's watching those guys look at the instrument. And you know, up till that point, I was a student of Indian music, and it pounded into my head was the repertoire of Indian classical music. And I would quote that repertoire verbatim, rigid, disciplined, clear, no problem. But I never asked my instrument, what do you want to say? I never asked my instrument, what are your possibilities? What lies in your world? Let me see that, let me feel that, let me discover that. You know, when someone like Ustad Vilayat Khan Sahab sat with his sitar, the sitar said, command me. Tell me what you want me to do. And out of that instrument came information that never existed in any other instrument, any other sitar or anywhere. It suddenly was a whole different experience of listening to Rag Yaman or Maru Behag or Bageshri. It was different. It was Ustad Amir Khan Sahab singing Marwa. And you never hear Marwa like that. You never heard it. It was something that was a genie or a spirit of Marwa that was circulating through his nerves, and you were hearing this information that and the story being told like it had never been told before. So that's something that I discovered, that the rhythm was still 4/4 or 6/8. It was still Keherwa or Dadra, but when Armando played it, it had multi-dimensions to it. When Tony Williams played it, it floated and was soaring in the skies, like so differently. There were expressions, there was feelings, there was all this behind it. And so these people are the ones who actually allowed me to be able to look at my instrument and find a way to be able to transpose that information. I was sitting with George Harrison in Trident Studio in London, and we were editing an album recorded in live concert of Pandit Ravi Shankar, Ustad Ali Akbar Khan, and my father, Ustad Allah Rakha. And I was drafted to help George help edit, cut the music together. So we were sitting there, and then somewhere along the line, George says to me, you know, there's this record I'm making, and there's this song called Living in the Material World, and I feel that there is a section where tabla could be used. Would you do that for me? I said, sure. So I laid it down for him, played a little tabla. And in the process, I asked him a question that, look, you learned sitar from Ravi Shankar ji, and you play sitar, you played it on Wonderwall or whatever it is. Why don't you play sitar on stage, perform on stage? And he said, Zakir, look, I've learned to play the sitar, but I'm not a good enough sitar player to be able to do justice to my guru's teachings. I don't want to make him look silly. I don't want to spoil his teachings character by just doing injustice to it. But whatever I have learned from him, I can take it on my instrument, the guitar, because I can play that very well. And I can transpose it and pay homage to that music. Bulb coming on. It became very clear to me that I should take the Afro-Cuban bata drumming, I should take the Latin percussion of congos or djembes and stuff, African, or kodo drums or Indonesian gamelan or jazz drumming or rock drumming, and take all that information and just print it on my instrument and give all these dimensions to the tabla that it has not had before. And so that learning process happened from one little incident after a concert. He should be different. And then having all this information available to me and having that encouragement allowed me to be able to, I guess, find a way to speak tabla multilingually that probably was not possible before.
Thank you, Zakir. Oh, no.
And it's all in the book.
Oh my God, really? Really? I don't know, I'm just dying to tell you so many more stories through him, but you know, the time is up. Nasreen, I was going to ask you something else, but we've really run out of time. Payal, if you'll allow, there's just one story which is so sublime that it really has to be told, which is that, you know, you were talking about your father and how he had images of Mia Qadir Bakhsh in his mind. And it's so bizarre that your connection with your father and the kind of parallels in your life are so strong that you spoke about that whole Chilla Katna, and when you went up to Haji Malang's shrine and you took that retreat, and then he came to you. Will you just share that story? Because that idea of faith, you've talked about the math, the science, the psychology, all of that of music, and you've given us the nuts and bolts of divinity pretty much. But will you talk now about this moment of faith, this absolutely inexplicable encounter you had?
Well, chilla is something that is, well, at least in the music world, is sort of coming of age thing. It's moving on to the next level. It's being able to face the music, actually, as a young man, no pun intended. When you sit down, music has vibrations. It has frequencies that surround you, go inside of you, and create a different kind of a rhythm inside of you that takes you sometimes in areas where you may not want to visit. It depends on what you have been doing. I mean, whether your life has been a positive one, or are there negative elements in it? And all that, once you sit down to do a chilla, will affect you. Consider this, you're alone by yourself in this place. And somebody is going to leave food outside for you to be able to eat every now and then. But for those 40 days, I don't know why the biblical number, but for those 40 days, you are there with your instrument and the spirit of that instrument. And you're going to converse, and you're going to talk to each other and come to terms as to your roles with each other and how you're going to help each other move forward. Now, in that process, when those frequencies are happening, you know how it is when you're listening to one sound, like the meditation bowl of the monks when they meditate. That kind of, in a monotonous way, sort of semi-hypnotizes you into being able to focus onto the task at hand, and that is to empty your mind and meditate to a point where you can just clear all the debris out of your system and extract that which is important to you. So chilla is somewhat like that. But if you had issues, then those issues will arise at the same time. There have been situations I've heard from musicians who've gone insane because the visions and the interaction with those spirits were such that it just twisted everything away out of you. Some, were just left speechless and stunned, and so that happened. Me, I did my first chilla without any permission from my father and all. My father was gallivanting around the rest of the globe with Pandit Ravi Shankar, so I was left to my own devices, so I decided to do it. And I was 15, 16 years old, so innocent enough, not much negative had happened to me, so I did my chilla. And I decided that I was going to focus on this element of tabla that I thought that needed to be visited and looked into deeply. And I worked on it, and I worked on it, and I worked on it, and I finished my chilla. And I did have experiences, I did have vision, I had visitations, all that happened. But anyway, so I'm home, and my father comes back from the tour, and my mother said that your son did this. And my father was livid, simply because he had not given me the proper instructions on how to navigate through issues in that chilla. He wasn't there to do it. How could I do it? In any case, so he was very upset and angry and all and so on. But he never beat you or anything. He just kind of retreated in his world, and he paced up and down the living room with his hands behind his back and wondering about it. After some time, he came back to me and said, okay, so what did you see? What did you learn? So I just kind of said, well, I was working on this and this and this and this, and this became clear to me, this became clear to me, this became clear to me. And I said, oh, by the way, I also came up with this. And I recited this particular thing for him. And he said, how do you know this? Very hesitant. How do you know this? I said, well, there was this vision, and this composition came from this vision to me. And so then he walked away again, and he was pacing up and down and up and down and up and down. And after a while he came back to me and said, describe to me the vision. So I said it was this gentleman who looked like this, dressed in this way, and he came to me and he said, play this. So he thought about it again, and for a while he didn't know what to say to me. He walked up and down, he talked to my mother, came back and he said, you really don't know who that person was? I said, I don't know who this person was. And this is the composition he taught you? I said, yes. He said, you know who that is? I didn't know. He said, this is your great-grand guru, who I had never seen. I had never met. There were no photos. Imagine that. And the composition I had never known. But he said, this composition is from this teacher, this great-grand guru. So that's Chilla.
So we'll end on that. Zakir, could you do just a jhalak of that rhythm that came to you in this divination?
Oh my God. No lightning, please. So the composition was a very simple one, and it became a common staple for a lot of our students to learn and play afterwards. So the composition that that he gave it to me was like this. It was now up to that point, I was 16-year-old. I hadn't learned how to play 7/4. 7 beats over 4 beats. It's called Geeta Ang, Mishra Jati. So this is not something that my father had made available to me. And there it was. I was doing that, and I was bringing that to him. So it was a bit of a shocker to him to be able to see that this happened. You know, it's very difficult to accept. It's not easy to be seeing that there are situations, there are happenings, there are events that takes place, and there are spirits that walk amongst us, and that our ability to be able to say yes, that they do, that yes, this does happen, that yes, it is valid, and yes, it has relevance. It's very difficult for us to accept that as human beings today. In the olden days, yes, it is okay. I remember I used to be with my father between 3 and 6 a.m., learn rhythms, go to the madrasa, learn the Quran, up and down. By the way, if you were doing this, you could mumble anything you want and mullah wouldn't know what happened. So I would do the Quran and then cross the street to St. Michael's Church and do the hymns with the students and be marched into the classroom. So within a space of a few hours, I would have done the Shiva Stuti or Saraswati Vandana, the Surah Yasin from the Quran, or sung, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. But the fact is, none of those, either the mullah or the priest or anybody, ever pushed upon me the idea that what they were saying was the real truth. It was never pushed. Those were different times. So that's it.
Well, thank you very, very much. You know, we've really run short of time because there was so much more we wanted Nasreen to say, so much more that we want Zakir Saab to say. But I would really urge you to take the book because there are many other really defining relationships in his life with his mother, his wife. You know, we haven't spoken about the women in his life who really shaped him and made him who he is. There's also talk of, you know, his idea of success, his idea of meditation, you know, just so much that the book has to offer. As I said, literally the nuts and bolts of divinity, the faith and the science of it. And Nasreen has done an absolutely brilliant job in refracting Zakir Hussain for us. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very, very much, Nasreen and Zakir.